Okay, so let's go over a couple of the different attributes for your camera. Um, we are able to control the focal length here, which is something that is correlates to kind of a real world lens size. So here we have what's the default is a 35 millimeter lens. If we like decrease this to 8 millimeter, we have a perspective. Our perspective kind of shifts, and it's almost like a fisheye perspective. Um, the focal length and the angle of view are tied to each other. So when you increase one, you decrease the other. And so what you can see kind of happening is the larger the focal length, so the larger the camera, let's say we have a 70 millimeter camera, the kind of more flattening out of your scene you will kind of get. I'm going to back this up a little bit so you can see um, that the perspective is, the angle of view is a lot larger. I mean, a lot smaller um, as the focal length gets larger. And so you have like this wider perspective so that the perspective kind of gets maintained and is a little bit more equalized throughout the whole scene. Whereas if you decrease the focal length, let's say we decrease it to 16, um, and let's zoom back in here, you start to get a whole lot more distortion in the perspective. So the perspective really kind of narrows in, and our angle of view becomes a lot greater. So this is one kind of effect you can manipulate with the camera. Another thing is the depth of field. And there is this depth of field tag, tab, but this does not work in Arnold. So let's go down to the Arnold tab. And I'm going to check on this Enable DOF. And so what this does is it will enable you to set a kind of focal length for your camera. And so let me just get started by, let's say, I'm going to increase this to, let's increase it to like 800. And the way I can get, you're still not really seeing anything happening, but if I start to increase the aperture size, you'll see here that we start to get a kind of out of focus, fuzzy kind of look to our camera. And I've added in my scene here this sphere, and I've done this because, and I've also added here a heads-up display information. If I go to display, heads-up display, and turn on object details, I can see here, and I select my object, I can see here what the distance from the camera is. And so with that number, I can go back and select my camera and enter in, and I don't remember what it said, but it say 98. Okay, so if my distance from the camera is 98, go back and select my camera. And I can set that focal distance here. If I set this to 98, that will put my camera in focus. Let's zoom in a little bit, although now the distance from the camera is going to shift. Let me go back up. Let me change my focal length here back to 35 so I have a little bit more of a realistic view. And if I select this now, I'm at 97. So go back to my camera and go down to depth of field and type in 97. And what you can kind of see happening here, and it's because we're in this test resolution. Let me go back and maybe make a bit of a larger, go back to my normal render size here. And what you can see is that we have our sphere is in focus, so that this depth is in focus, and then it becomes out of focus as it gets closer to the camera. So this is kind of a really nice way to kind of create a macro lens effect maybe. We also are able to change the camera type here. We can change it to maybe a fisheye lens, which is a little bit similar to changing the focal length, but we have a little bit of a kind of curving distortion that happens. So play around with some of these settings here in order to really kind of refine exactly what your image looks like.